Hi, this is Chris Grotefin. How are you? This is Total Life Concepts. Get busy living. And today I'm going to talk about some year-round tips and tricks. Some people have different times of the year when they have difficulty keeping up with their fitness regimen. So I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I do and some of the things that I recommend to my clients that they do. And basically, it's just keeping it fresh and keeping it, mixing things up. The first thing I've got a list of 10 things that I want to talk to you about today. And mixing it up is the first thing. The thing that I think I tell people do more than most or more than anything else is that when it's time to whenever anything starts feeling stale, it's like there's this thing. It happens about every 6 to 8 weeks, and it's called a plateau. And plateaus happen, and a plateau is usually um, right in sync. When you hit a physical plateau, it's usually right in sync with a mental plateau because your body starts getting used to something. It's not as new and not as fresh, so you change it up, you mix it up. So these are some. I'm going to give you like nine more things to do. But for example, during the summer, you can do, or excuse me, during the winter, you can do more things on indoors that you would never imagine doing. And I like to kind of keep them as things that are going to lend themselves to improving the other sports I like to play. So, one thing that happens with one thing that's happened to me a bunch of times, like I used to be all bound up and not flexible. So I ended up in a kickboxing class, and you know what? That kind of changed my changed forever my flexibility. When you practice a bunch of kicks, when the going gets tough, what it comes down to is what you practice. So the things that I practice like kickboxing. What I ended up doing was ramping up my ability to do things. It turns out if you want to be powerful at something, you need to be strong, but you also need equal amounts of flexibility because power is a combination of strength plus speed, and there's no such thing as power if you don't have the ability for speed, and that takes that takes what's called the stretch reflex. So basically, what happened when I took that kickboxing class was all of a sudden I had some new mobility that I never had before, and I realized that it increased my speed in my skating. During my cross country ski skating, it increased my ability to do things on my mountain bike. It increased my ability to do things on my skis. So I just by trying kickboxing, I greatly increased my mobility and my flexibility in my hips. I kind of like to think about this in terms of like similar to like a mixer board, and there's like the sonic things that we listen to, and then there's subsonic, and then there's supersonic, and you might consider your training for your cycling to be the sonic part. But supersonic and subsonic is doing things that you don't normally attribute to the sport. Like riding the bike is not necessarily doing things like kickboxing, but when you end up having extra power on your bike because of something like kickboxing, you realize that cross training is essential. So some wintertime off-season times are times to do things that are like subsonic and supersonic, where you're training things that you don't normally do, but you end up having benefits that you never had before. The other thing is there's this class I teach, and I've got this um, thing called Moxie where I've got like hundreds of classes, a library of classes. And if anybody's interested, please contact me about getting involved in those because that's the ability to try lots and lots of different classes, but full function is the class that I really like to emphasize. And full function is basically the class that I keep in my year throughout the year that is sharpening the saw for all of my sports. And it's based on the muscles that surround it's core stability, core strengthening, and it's a combination of what's called proximal stability and distal mobility. The combination basically of Pilates and yoga are a match made in heaven. So it turns out when I can keep my game strong and full function, which is another thing that I have to do inside, I have to do in a comfortable, environment. All it really takes is my mat, so I can do it anywhere at any time. That's a class that I basically keeps me able to do pretty much anything I want to try. I'm gonna go to the second one. There's a thing that I've always done around winter time that is basically you become a bodybuilder in winter. Now, why do you do that? Well, probably because you're going to have the opportunity to spend more time indoors and more time in the gym environment, where there's weightlifting and things like that available. Plus, you've also got this influx, especially around the holidays, of a great deal of outrageous calories. You're getting big meals in Thanksgiving. You're getting big meals at Christmas. You're getting big meals around New Year's. And why not use all those big meals to transform into getting muscled up? I used to be kind of nervous about getting muscled up in the wintertime because I didn't feel like that was helping out or lending itself to my sports. I don't want to be big and heavy and bulky when I'm riding my mountain bike. I don't want to be big and heavy and bulky while I'm out running. The cool thing that happens is your body's not stupid. Your body's not stupid at all. Hey, thanks for joining. Let me know in the chat who you are. when I'm you know when I become a bodybuilder in winter, it's because I use that time to increase my muscle mass, but I also end up getting quite a bit stronger. And what happens is when I get back on my bike, when I get back into my summer sports, my body sheds it. It sheds that mass, but it keeps the muscle memory, so I stay strong. It's kind of interesting. You can really increase your overall strength, and your body says, "Well, I don't need all that extra muscle mass," so it sheds it. And oftentimes, if I get strong during January, February, and maybe into March, I get back on my bike around the middle of March or toward the end of March. I end up seeing um, that the strength is a benefit to me, but I also as I get back on my bike longer, I start shedding that some of that bulk, but the muscle memory remains. So I mean, everybody I talk to, I try and say, go ahead, lift weights in winter, get as big as you want. Your body's going to shed it for your sports. It just happens. It doesn't hold on to what the body doesn't need. It doesn't hold up. It holds on to. Another thing I do in the wintertime, this is specifically with in terms of my stationary cycling, is I watch YouTube. And I get to travel all over the world now that YouTube's so cool. In fact, I just did it last night. I plugged in this thing that says cycling around the Alps, and I got this beautiful thing that somebody did on their Garmin that actually shows the pitch that they're on. It shows the whether they're climbing or on the downhill. And I just get creative. Like I play around with my cadence on my bike, and whenever it's on the flats, for example, I'm playing at 80 RPM. So I'm playing around with different cadences. And then I'm sorry, when I'm on the flats, I'm staying around 90 RPMs. When I'm climbing, I'm trying to stay at around 80 RPMs. And when I'm going downhill, I take it up to around 100 RPMs, and I play around with all the different cadences while I'm on my bike. And it's kind of fun because like when I got my RPMs up at 100 RPMs and I'm watching the TV, the guy's going downhill really fast. So I'm leaning into these turns, and I'm kind of just basically acting as if I'm the guy that's riding that bike. It's kind of fun. Another thing is just to put on a movie, and you can log some serious long, slow distance time. And a lot of times I'll practice my nose breathing, my deep diaphragmatic nasal breathing with a lower intensity at a very long duration. Boy, if I'm going to sit there on that bike for that entire movie, ends up being an hour and a half that I'm on the bike. Boy, I get done with that what I normally would have been on the couch or on the lazy boy. I've done an hour and a half deep diaphragmatic nasal breathing. I'm all blissed out, and I have a um, pretty incredible experience. That's not just not just an exercise routine, but it's also a meditative, a full blown meditation. So that's kind of what I do when I'm on my stationary bike on the indoors. There's no reason for things to be boring just because you have to be indoors. I always set up a fan that's blowing on my face, so just make things as comfortable as possible. Also, the thing that I think about during off season, like if like I really like mountain biking, but I tell you what, Nordic skiing is one of the best complements. It's very, very complementary to mountain biking. And when I practice Nordic skiing, it's another thing that's kind of like that supersonic and subsonic. I get back on my mountain bike, I'm like, wow, I wonder why I'm so much stronger. I wonder why I'm so much better. But it's the cross training benefit that I get from cross country skating, and also just the outrageous way to maintain your um, your cardiovascular benefit. For one thing, usually when you're cross country skiing, you're up at a high elevation. And another thing is when you're cross country skiing, you're using your arms and legs both, kind of like mountain biking, but you get a great deal of cardiac improvement, and um, cardiovascular improvement, efficiency and effectiveness. Then you get back on your bike and it doesn't seem like it's the off season. So I always try and cross train such that when I get back into my sport, I feel like I'm entering into the season almost like mid season. I'm going to keep going. Road trip, man. This is a great time to say, like Soma and I were talking about going down to Phoenix. Man, they're in the middle of their best season for riding right now. So throw your bike in the car and take a road trip. You can just put your head down and drive for however long it takes to get down there, and then spend a little time on in McDowell um, trails. All of a sudden, for one thing, you get to do some serious off-season, what seems like mid-season rides. That's down in Phoenix. We've also got Moab nearby. You don't. Oftentimes, you don't have to look very far, especially when you live in the Rockies, to find places that are lower elevation and easier to get. Easy enough to get to. But a road trip is a great idea. Now, another thing that I do during the wintertime is I watch my wattage, and I become a real tech geek. Like when I'm on my, I don't usually watch these things when I'm, I don't usually watch these things when I'm outdoors. I don't have time for that. I'm having too much fun. I don't really like to get wrapped up in. I don't really like to get wrapped up in data. But when I'm indoors, I can look at those things more closely. And so I really watch my wattage and I try and see what it takes to maintain wattage. I play around with different cadences and different things like that on my bike to make sure that I've got that I can maintain these. Um, what cadence gives me the best wattage and things like that. And I watch those things. Um, some other things that I do while I'm needing to be inside is I balance on the ball while I'm watching Netflix. Whenever the core strength is you always hear about core strength, and core strength is really important, but it's not just a matter of making the core muscles strong. There has to be the neurological connection too. So whenever you're doing an exercise that's using both strength and balance, that's a match made in heaven. Getting a whole lot more benefit. So you want core muscles to be strong, but you also want to make them smart. So while I'm watching Netflix, I'm sitting on the ball as long as I can. You can sit on the ball balancing. I don't get to touch the floor, but I'm balancing on my butt, and I'm kind of sitting on it like it's like I'm sitting on a kayak and moving it back and forth and using my core muscles and staying balanced that way. And then I do it while I'm watching the same movie. I balance on my belly, and I balance on my belly as long as I can. And I balance on my hands and knees, play around with one hand opposite foot, and then pop up on my knees and balance on my knees. And all of a sudden, I watched a whole Netflix movie or episode that I'm watching of something, and I spent the whole time bouncing on the ball. You talk about a win-win rather than just sitting on the couch. You can do these things indoors during the winter and end up having a real benefit from having exercise while you normally would just be eating chips and drinking beer on the couch. So I got a couple more here. I'm almost finished here. There's this thing called a slide board. And a slide board is kind of, they use them for to mimic skating. Basically, it's a real slippery material like a mylar, and then it's got two bumpers on either side. This is something to do during the winter time. That is amazing cross training, but it's also amazing training just for your skiing. Basically, you put a slippery thing on your foot, and it's a very slippery surface. So I do like lunges in place on this slippery board, and then I do the side to side exercise, and then I do inner thighs and outer thighs. It's basically a series of those three exercises where I go side to side until I'm fatigued, and then I do lunges in place until I'm fatigued, and then I do heels out, heels in until I'm fatigued. And I just like do 3 sets through those things on the slide board. Um, and in between, the slide board, a lot of times that gets your muscles pretty tired, but I recover with a jump rope. So the beautiful combination and a heck of a great workout is to get you one of those slide boards. Practice those three things. And when you're like, when I just get done doing my slides, my cardio is up pretty high. My legs are kind of tired from doing that. I get the jump rope out and I maintain my cardio with just a little mellow jump roping, and then get back into the second one. It's a good way to mix it up. All of a sudden, 15 minutes is gone and you're exhausted. Great training for both the strength, dynamic balance, and because when you're standing on something slippery, again, standing on something slippery is going to be working your big muscles, but it's also going to be working those muscles that surround your spine because you're making all those little catches for balance. And that's where you make your muscles smart, not just strong. They lend themselves to your coordination quite a bit. Um, so basically, it's another thing. Sorry, I forgot about swimming. Swimming's huge. I want you to. It's a great time to go to the pool and swim. Amazing cross training for just about every sport. If you're doing things like cross country skiing and doing things like biking and doing things like hiking outdoors and doing things basically on foot, you'll get in the pool and you'll feel like a chunk of lead. So training for something that's just radically different sends your body into that subsonic and supersonic training. You don't really realize the benefits you're getting for your sports until you get back on the bike or get back out and outside. But what happens is you're getting all kinds of cross training benefits. Swimming is fantastic, especially when you'll play around with leg strength, just kicking on the kickboard. You do your different strokes. That's great for mobility in the shoulders, but also just a whole different strength, all different levels of strength that are more based on the endurance muscles, like the slow twitch muscles are the things you work in the pool. Um, One last thing is practice things you don't do outside. Um, for example, I'm giving you examples on my bike, but maybe this will spur your creativity to do some things that you don't normally practice when you're inside. There's this thing, and it works the best on a spin bike, actually. But when you're spinning with one leg, basically, I don't do that during the summer. I did that a long time ago. There were some guys I rode with in Telluride, and every time we get back riding back into Telluride along that big long flat, we'd ride with one leg and then we'd ride with the other one leg at the end of the ride. And it was amazing training. But anyway, I don't do that anymore. That's the thing that I always like to skip. But it's a fantastic thing to do, especially if you've got a spin bike, because a spin bike has that wheel that's heavy and it's got some inertia, so it's easier to spin with one leg at a time when you're on a spin bike than when you're um, on a regular bike like a road bike. But if you can do it while you're on a road bike or a mountain bike, you're doing pretty good job of learning how to get that spin. Basically, it's working on the push, the pull, the push, the pull, the lift, and the kick. You gotta learn how to get power around that whole circle of the pedal stroke instead of just a downstroke. A lot of people are like mashers. And I used to be a masher. I used to have really big quads and stuff. And then when I started doing the single leg spin, it completely changed the way my legs were built. But rather than being strong just on the downstroke, I was strong on the downstroke, the bottom, the backstroke, and the top stroke. You learn how to fire. It's called a firing order in your muscles, and it just goes boom, 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 boom while you're riding. Um, on the bike, you're actually using your leg a whole lot more. Those kinds of things really carry over to things like skiing. It's amazing. Single leg spin on the bike, also some of the intervals that you don't normally do. Like I talked about the long, slow distance while I'm breathing through my nose. That's a lot of people when they're training, they do things like base miles during the spring. Man, if you do the nose breathing while you're watching a movie or something like that, and you let your nose be the guide of how hard you're working and staying in your lungs, staying within your lungs so you can breathe through your nose. You can train yourself to actually get to a really high level of output while you're doing um, the nose breathing, and you realize, shoot, I've done 3 minute 58 second or 3 hour 58 minute century rides with with big groups, but breathing through my nose. And then I get down and I recover very quickly. So there's some things that you can do, especially for human performance, that you don't usually do in the summer. You'd rather go out and just ride, that you can work on to kind of sharpen the saw. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about relative to mixing things up during the winter time, during the off season times. It's like you can really do a lot to 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 give your body different things to adapt to. And no matter what, when your body kind of gets into ruts, especially those of us who kind of have one or two sports that we do all the time, the cross training is really, really important. That's why I always keep my full function classes, to make sure that I don't end up with any big imbalances. The full function class takes care of any imbalances that I would make, that I would build if I was just riding my bike, for example, too much. Like riding your bike, if you're paying attention to aerodynamics, it's kind of hard on your crappy, it gives you crappy posture. And so you get to work on your carriage and maintaining that upright posture when you're working on the core strengthening and things like that. So I hope that kind of gives you some ideas. These are year-round kind of fitness tips and tricks. And thank you for joining in. If you have any questions, please please contact us at Total Life Concept, and I'd love to chat with you about some ideas if that spurred your interest. Hey, thanks a lot.